that refuses to stay quiet. In a place the world rarely looks for innovation, one African mind starts asking questions that most people are taught not to ask. Not how do we improve what exists, but what if the rules themselves are wrong? Neighbors see metal scraps, wires, components pulled from discarded machines. Nothing that looks revolutionary. Nothing that suggests history is about to bend. And that's the point. Because the most disruptive ideas don't announce themselves. They hide in plain sight, dismissed as hobbies, curiosities, impossibilities. But day after day, something takes shape. Not fast. Not perfectly, but deliberately. This isn't imitation. There's no blueprint to follow. No textbook chapter that explains what's being attempted here. Every adjustment is learned the hard way. Every failure leaves behind information. Every success raises a more dangerous question. Why hasn't anyone else tried this? As word quietly spreads, reactions are predictable. Some laugh. Some warn. Some say it can't be done because if it could, someone important would have done it already. Yet the work continues. The backyard becomes a testing ground. Measurements replace guesses. Patterns begin to emerge. What started as an idea slowly turns into a system, one that behaves differently than expected. One that doesn't fit neatly into existing categories. And that's when things get uncomfortable. Because the invention isn't just clever. It's functional. It does something that, according to conventional thinking, shouldn't be possible at all. It challenges assumptions people didn't even realize they were making about energy, motion, limits. At first, the demonstrations are small, controlled, easy to dismiss. But repetition has a way of stripping excuses away. When the same result appears again and again, skepticism starts to sound less like science and more like fear. And still, all of this is happening in a backyard. No factory, no corporate backing, no global audience. Just one mind refining an idea while the world looks elsewhere. Until one day it doesn't. Because the moment this invention steps beyond that backyard, into public view, into real-world conditions, the reaction changes. Quiet curiosity turns into urgent attention. The questions turn into demands for explanations. Footage circulates, grainy at first, then clearer. The invention performing the same task repeatedly, under different conditions, without the usual inputs everyone expects. No hidden cables. No staged environments. Just consistency. That's when the tone changes. What was once ignored is now scrutinized. Experts weigh in from afar. Commentators argue over terminology. Some try to fit the invention into familiar frameworks, hoping it will lose its edge once labeled. Others dismiss it outright because accepting it would mean admitting that something fundamental was missed. But the inventor doesn't rush to explain. Instead, he demonstrates, again and again. Each repetition tightens the story. Each test narrows the room for doubt. Because while theories can be debated endlessly, outcomes are stubborn things. They don't care who believes in them. And now, the backyard is no longer just a backyard. Visitors arrive. Cameras follow. Authorities take notes. Questions shift from "is this real?" to "who controls this?" and "what happens if it scales?" Those questions carry weight. Because inventions that challenge established systems don't just attract praise, they attract pressure. Offers begin to appear. Some generous. Some urgent. Some with conditions that sound harmless until you read the fine print. But this story isn't about a deal being signed overnight. It's about restraint. The inventor understands something most people don't. The first person to touch a breakthrough doesn't own it. The first person to rush it often loses it. So instead of chasing headlines, the focus stays on refinement. On understanding what the invention can do, and just as importantly, what it shouldn't be allowed to do yet. Behind the scenes, tests grow more ambitious. Durations increase. Loads change. Environments shift. The invention keeps responding, not perfectly, but predictably. Predictability is the language institutions understand. And that's when the implications start spreading beyond technology. Because this isn't just a clever device. It's a proof of concept that challenges how innovation itself is distributed. It suggests that access, not intelligence, has been the real bottleneck all along. If one person, working in a backyard with limited resources, can reach this point, what happens when thousands can? That question makes people uneasy. Not openly, not on record, but seriously. Because history has shown this pattern before. When something small works too well, too consistently, it forces systems to respond. Attempts are made to frame the story. Some call it an exaggeration. Some label it misunderstood engineering. Some insist it's old science being repackaged. But none of those explanations stop the demonstrations. What's happening here doesn't need grand theories to survive. It survives on repeatability, on the fact that the invention behaves the same way whether it's watched or not, whether it's praised or doubted. And that consistency is its shield. As interest grows, so does resistance. Not loud resistance, subtle resistance. Requests for compliance. Requests for delays. Requests to verify things indefinitely. Because slowing something down is often easier than stopping it outright. Yet even that has limits. Because the idea is no longer contained. Others begin experimenting. Not copying, adapting. Testing similar principles. Asking the same forbidden questions. The backyard becomes a symbol, not a location. And symbols are dangerous to control. Because they inspire. Suddenly, students are talking about it. Tinkerers. Engineers working after hours. People who were never invited into innovation conversations begin imagining themselves inside them. The invention does something unexpected. It lowers the psychological barrier to trying. That might be its most disruptive feature of all. The inventor knows this. He's careful not to claim ownership over the future. He speaks about process, not miracles. About work, not destiny. Because the moment an idea becomes myth, it stops being useful. So the focus stays grounded. Test by test. Adjustment by adjustment. Quiet progress. And while the world argues over whether this invention should exist, it continues doing the one thing arguments can't undo. It works. Right there in the open. And as long as it keeps working, the conversation can't be put back into its old shape. Because something subtle has already happened. The invention has stopped being the center of the story. Instead, the process behind it has taken its place. People aren't just asking what was built anymore. They're asking how someone like this was able to build it at all. That question travels fast. It crosses borders more easily than hardware ever could. It slips into classrooms, workshops, online forums, late-night discussions between people who've never met but recognize the same frustration. That innovation has always felt gated, guarded, reserved for those with permission. The backyard proves something uncomfortable. Permission was never the requirement. Curiosity was. And persistence. The inventor didn't bypass institutions out of rebellion. He bypassed them because they weren't there. No funding path. No accelerator. No research grant tailored for ideas that challenge fundamentals. So the work followed the only available route forward. That reality forces a reckoning. If breakthroughs can emerge outside the usual pipelines, then those pipelines aren't filters for quality. They're filters for conformity. And once that idea takes hold, it's hard to erase. The invention continues evolving. Components are refined. Measurements become tighter. Limitations are documented honestly, not hidden. This transparency earns something rare, cautious respect from even the harshest critics. Not belief. Respect. Because respect means engagement. And engagement means the idea has survived its most dangerous phase, the one where it could be ignored. Now it's being watched closely. And while some observers hope to find a flaw that ends the story cleanly, others are preparing for the opposite outcome. They're asking what it would mean if this isn't an anomaly. If it's the first visible crack in a much larger surface. Because if one backyard can do this, how many others have been overlooked? And that question doesn't stay theoretical for long. Because once people begin looking, they start finding signs that were always there. Unfinished ideas abandoned too early, unconventional experiments dismissed without review, minds that learned to stay quiet because the cost of speaking up felt too high. The backyard invention becomes a reference point, a reminder that absence of recognition is not absence of value. Quietly, similar efforts begin to surface. Not copies. Not replicas, but echoes. Different materials, different methods, different goals, yet all driven by the same realization. Innovation doesn't need permission. It needs persistence and space to fail without ridicule. The backyard wasn't special because of its location. It was special because it allowed failure to exist long enough to turn into insight. That's when the pressure intensifies. Because now, it's no longer about one inventor. It's about a pattern forming outside the usual lines of control. And patterns are harder to contain than individuals. Institutions respond the only way they know how, by trying to absorb the narrative. Conferences are organized. Panels are announced. Language shifts. What was once dismissed becomes emerging, then interesting, then worthy of further study. But something has already slipped past them. The center of gravity has moved. The backyard inventor continues working, but with a new awareness. Not pride, responsibility. Because once an idea proves that boundaries were artificial, it carries consequences beyond its creator. It invites others to test limits they were told not to touch. And that invitation can't be revoked. The invention itself keeps evolving, but it's no longer the most powerful thing in the story. The most powerful thing is the example it set. That world-changing ideas don't always arrive through polished corridors. They sometimes arrive through persistence, improvisation, and refusal to accept impossible as a final answer. The world may still debate the invention's implications. It may argue about scale, safety, readiness. Those debates will take years. But the shift has already happened. Somewhere right now, another backyard exists. Another mind is working quietly. And that's where this story truly ends. Not with applause. Not with headlines. Not even with full acceptance. It ends with a realization that the future doesn't always announce itself from laboratories, corporations, or billion-dollar campuses. Sometimes it begins where no one is watching, in a small backyard, with limited tools, with an idea strong enough to survive doubt, silence, and neglect. History rarely remembers the places where breakthroughs are born. It remembers the moment the world finally notices. But by then, it's already too late. Because the invention has already done its real work, not just proving what's possible, but exposing how many possibilities were ignored.